What up, C10 Nation? Monday, May 22nd, and I just got news that Harry Bentley Bradley passed away. He was our guest on episode 222, August of 21. So I'll tell you what, I wanted Harry pretty bad, and I worked it for a while, and then I kind of just said, you know what, he doesn't want to do it. I don't know that he'd be a good guest. And I had made a phone call to him, and we talked, and he just said, "Hey, I'm not interested." And then it worked out. So you'll hear the pod, but again, very sad news that Harry Bentley Bradley passed away today at the age of 83. So I'm going to do a rebroadcast of his episode. He worked for GM in the 60s, helped design the 67, 68 truck. You know, if you look back through some of the articles and the pictures, and then one of the stories I love to talk about, and you'll hear it in the pod, is how he had his El Camino. He's working at Mattel. He's the only one there. He doesn't even know what he's going to be doing. And the owner of Mattel walks up and goes, "What's that thing outside?" And he says, "My El Camino." And he says, "I want all the first Hot Wheels to have that wheel, tire, red line combo." And circumstances are that because he had polio and he was parked in the handicap parking spot for the rest of our lives, we know that the Hot Wheels have those cool mag wheels and those red lines. So fortunate to be able to sit down with Harry. He was gracious. I don't know what happened. I believe his wife said, "Hey, you need to get on this podcast. You need to, just engage your legacy." So with that, again, thank you guys for listening. Thank you for tuning in. And we're going to rebroadcast episode 222 with Harry Bentley Bradley. Keep his family in your thoughts and prayers, obviously. Sounds like, he was an instructor as well. So I'm sure there's a lot of people out there, students throughout the country that are in automotive design that are hearing of Harry's passing. So thanks again. We've got Claudia, RST Girl, up next. She'll be episode 262. I was thinking about dropping it tomorrow, but with this, I'm going to drop this, and then I'll get to Claudia up next. So rebroadcast Harry Bentley Bradley. Let me know what you think. This is why we get the pod. This is why I love capturing some of these legacy interviews with people that have so much rich history in the automotive culture and scene that we love so much. So thanks again for tuning in, and sorry to hear about this one today. Enjoy the pod.
Truck Talk Media.
C10 Talk, episode 222. Harry Bentley Bradley, master automotive designer, from GM to Hot Wheels and a whole lot more. Here we go.
Well, unquestionably at the time, especially to a young fellow, GM cars were the most stylish, the most, later I used these words now, but I didn't know them at the time. They were the most coherent designs, they were the most thematic designs, and they certainly were the most eye-opening designs.
Damn, son. Hey guys, I've got David Odegaard, product manager, United Pacific Industries. David, what's the latest?
One of our hottest items is the side mirrors with the directionals built into them, the LED arrow. These look cool. They look original. And however, when you're driving at night and you're changing lanes, that guy that sits in your blind spot, we all know who he is. He'll see that you're indicating and you're coming over. And there's a great safety factor with these mirrors, and they look cool too.
Blind spot guy, we don't want you there, but the United Pacific side mirrors, they work great. I have them on Orange Slice. I love them. How about the guys that are looking to go long bed to short bed? What are you guys offering them?
Yeah, we have all the parts for the 67 to 72 bed, new bed floors or whatever you may need, a new bed side, or that bed front that's always been smashed in by 50 years of stuff being, hauled in the bed.
Yeah, these trucks have been worked so hard over the years. We love that about our trucks, but you might have a floor that's dinged up. You need some parts. United Pacific's got it for you. What else are you guys working on?
Later this summer, we're going to have the front parking lights for the square bodies, 73 to 80. These are full LED. They've got the deluxe stainless steel trim around them. And, it's just a plug and play installation. And it's that final missing piece to convert your square body completely over to LED.
Perfect. So if you guys need some directional mirrors, some bedsides, bed floor, or maybe some LED lighting, United Pacific, upcarparts.com. That's upcarparts.com. But wait, there's more. You can save 15% by using code C10 Talk 15. That's C10 Talk 15 to save 15%. Thanks, David.
Thanks, Ronnie. We'll see you out there on the road.
Let me tell you what Melba's Toast is packing right here. All right, we've got 411 posi track out back, 750 double pumper, Edelbrock intakes, scored over 30, 11-1 pop-up pistons, turbojet, 390 horsepower. We're talking some bucking muscle.
What does that do? Does that blow your mind? That just happened.
Welcome to C10 Talk, your C10 truck podcast.
And now I have a chance to be the best, maybe the best in the world.
My old man is a television repairman. Ultimate set of tools. I can fix it.
I said I got 50 cents in that jukebox, and all I can hear is your mouth flapping. You hear that?
Here's your host, Ronnie Welch.
Here we go. 222, Harry Bentley Bradley. I don't think I ever thought this was going to happen, so pretty pumped that we recorded it, and it did happen. East Bay C10, thank you again. DM reached out and said, I think Harry's ready. So I don't know how that all transpired. I look forward to talking to him and diving in on that, but he said, I think he's ready, reach out. So I reached out to Harry, and sure enough, literally set it up. He said, call me at this time, this day, and we made it happen. There was a little bit the day of the interview, because I use Zoom and you have to call and then do some stuff to get into the Zoom meeting. It was a little bit touch and go, just a little bit. I was nervous. And as an interviewer, I was nervous. I was a lot more nervous than obviously if I'm just talking to one of the C10 guys. I don't know why. I guess I do know why. I didn't want to screw it up. I want to be very respectful and courteous. Harry is just his persona is so, maybe he's intimidating, and I don't even really know why, but I just want to make sure I nailed it. I want to make sure I asked the right questions. That's one thing as a podcaster that I stress about. I think I'm really good at it, but I think that, it's like, what questions would I want to know? What questions would you want to know? And I just hate listening to podcasts and think, dude, ask them this question. Why are you not asking this question? Sometimes I won't ask a question because maybe it's something that might piss them off, or you're like, all right, I can read between the lines on this. Maybe they don't want to talk about it. And that's kind of why when I first reached out to Harry, he didn't seem like he wanted to talk about it. So I didn't want to push it. And I was like, well, I don't want to interview somebody who doesn't want to be interviewed. But he had a change of heart. So I think that was about 3 years ago. That was just after I had interviewed Paul Hitch the first time. And it doesn't matter. This is a GM history, Hot Wheels history, automotive, art, design, and it's all history. It's all something where we can capture Harry. And I love that part of it. I love that we've got that audio. We've got that interview. And with Harry, when you dive in, there is so many different stories. So many. From the Hot Wheels, for example. Well, he designed 11 of the first 16. Well, he designed 12 of the first 16. Well, maybe he designed all 16. Did he design the 67 C10? Does he remember how much he designed and how much he didn't, and his part and his involvement? And if you go, not that you're going to, but if you go back, there's just so many different stories and so many different renditions of what Harry did and what he didn't do. And the bottom line is once you get somebody on the mic and they say what they did, that's what they did. So that's what we got. And that's probably why there's a little more pressure there with somebody capturing one of these interviews where you're probably not going to get to interview him again, and the history, the lineage, and the overall recollection. I had fun. I enjoyed interviewing Harry, and I hope you enjoy it as well. All right, so for us, road trip coming up, C10 Intervention. We're going road to recovery. El Chuco Alex is putting some stuff together. We got a group from Texas rolling to Phoenix, Phoenix rolling to Cali, Cali to NorCal. And that's coming up Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then I'm flying home. So I will try to get that episode out next, some C10 Intervention. Obviously, get on social media, follow us, C10 Talk, C10 Nation, and we'll have some live stuff. Should be a good time. Intervention, always a good time. First time at Woodlands, so I'm looking forward to that. Then I'm doing another road trip, a Bronco event for Bronco Talk. Then I get back and we are headed out to C10s in the park. September 16th, we leave Thursday. Friday, we'll get out there, and then the show is Saturday. So pre-show Friday, Hills Hot Rods that Friday night. Saturday, Brothers Truck Show, and then US Mags Party at the Square with the Spasmatics. You can jump back to that bonus episode with Terry, C10s in the park. And I have seen some passes. I've seen some passes come available for the C10 Intervention, and I believe I just saw a pass for C10s in the park. They're out there, so if you guys are thinking you're wanting to go, you got your truck done, you're ready to rock, and maybe at the time the tickets went out, you weren't, keep your ears on the tracks, and we'll do our best that we can to make sure we get that information out to you. Speaking of information, SEMA just went live today, a little interview, and I also did a post the other day because we get a lot of information that comes out and you don't know, okay, I'm going to look it up. I get online, I look it up. If I can't find it, then I'm not going to put it out there. I'm not just going to put out a rumor. It's got to be something credible. In this case, SEMA was actually doing a live interview on Instagram, and I recorded part of it. I put a little bit on the C10 Talk story. Bottom line is they are under the protocol of the county, the state, and they are going to require masks as of today, as of them going live on Instagram. And that was what we saw on the email as well. Apex is different, so don't get that confused. I think some people might have got that confused where Apex is more of an international show and they were requiring vaccination proof. They're requiring a lot of shit, okay? But SEMA is saying masks, you will wear a mask at this point. So just pay attention and see what's going on if you're going. If you're not going, won't matter. So a few other shows to mention. September 25th, you've got the second Show Me Shindig. Show Me Shindig. That's going to be in Carterville, Missouri. So get online, Show Me Shindig. I think that C10 Club Missouri has the info on that. Saturday, September 25th, Show Me Shindig. October 1st through the 3rd, Laughlin Auto Mixer, Forbidden Fantasy. You can get online. That's through Grindr TV, Brian Good. October 2nd through the 4th, you've got the Grill and Chill in Purvis, Mississippi. October 9th and the 10th, Mini Madness presents 30th Annual Slam Fest, Tampa, Florida, Florida State Fairgrounds. Everything is welcome at our show, quote unquote, everything. 30th anniversary, that's so awesome. Awesome, awesome, awesome. Then you've got the C10 Fall Revival, 22nd and 23rd, Oakboro, North Carolina. Then you've got SEMA. Then you've got the Big Daddy, the 11th annual Dino's Chevy Only Get Down. That's here in Glendale, Arizona. We'll have more on that, and we will be doing a show with Dino, a little pre-bonus show. And one thing about that show that I'm going to announce, and then I'm going to let you guys go, before Dino's, that Wednesday, Ben Dollar, they're having their 3rd annual Panhandle to the Party barbecue. So he'll open up his shop. They'll have some Texas barbecue, some beer, and everybody's welcome. You get a hold of Ben. You go in. You break bread. You have a good time. You crash out. You get up the next day. You make the run to Phoenix on Thursday. Thursday night you get in, and Friday you're ready to rock and roll. So 3rd annual Panhandle to the Party barbecue, Wednesday, November 10th. You get a hold of Ben Dollar. That's $5152. At $5152. Let him know, hey, I want to come. This is who I am. He gives you the information, the address, and all the good stuff. Okay? There you go. Plenty of announcements. Have a great weekend. Have a great Labor Day. and Louisiana, and you guys over there, Louisiana, Mississippi, in that Gulf Coast, we are thinking of you. We've seen the pictures. We've got C10 Club Louisiana. We got our boy Chris Stafford. We've got the Mississippi guys, the Dead End crew, all these people that are dealing with what's going on over there. So we are thinking about you guys. I've been able to reach out to a few of them. They say they're doing okay. Running off generators, of course, if you haven't seen that online because of the loss of power. But our thoughts and prayers are with you guys out there. Thank you guys for tuning in. We hope you dig the episode. Late. C10 Nation, it is an absolute honor to introduce to you Master Automotive Designer, Mr. Harry Bentley Bradley. I've been looking forward to this interview for a number of years now. Harry, welcome to C10 Talk.
It is my pleasure, and it's very good to talk to you, Ronnie.
Thank you so much again, Harry, for your time. I've done a lot of interviews, and I'm really looking forward to this. Harry, how are you? How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Okay. Done a lot of research on kind of who Harry is. Can you take us back to the young age and young Harry? Were you, as an artist, were you an automotive? Did you know that you had such a affection towards automotive, or were you more of an artist and then you came into the auto drawing and the auto art?
I definitely was an artist. As a child, I used to draw everything. Often my family and I would go to the Boston Symphony and I would draw the musicians. Other times I would draw landscapes and so forth. I began to move towards, if you will, product design during the Second World War. I was a young fellow through those years, pre-teen, and it was extraordinarily exciting for me as an artistic person to see airplanes and battleships and various types of tanks, and I was fascinated to try to draw them. The perspectives and the proportions were very challenging, and even though I was good at drawing people and the things of the natural type, I was drawn, as were many young fellows during the war years, I was drawn toward objects of war, which I no longer embrace. And then after the war, I started doing exactly what automobile designers, especially in Detroit, started to do. I began to take the aircraft and the power boat, such as PTs, take those design clues and adapt them toward automobiles. And that's when I really entered the field of automobile design as a young fellow.
Do you think, did your parents and at what point did you realize that you had a true talent for art, you know, as they saw you grow and draw so much? And like a lot of young men were attracted to the machine, you know, it might be a big tractor. You were obviously in the war era, and somebody at some point had to realize Harry's got a real talent here.
Well, my parents knew it right away when I was in grade school. My mother was, very interested in my talent and enrolled me in art classes. I went to art classes at the Boston Museum of Fine Art and also out in our local community outside of Boston. And so I was, getting drawing lessons. In elementary school, I was always drawing, and I recall having, during holiday times, such as Thanksgiving or Halloween, I would be the person given all the different color chalks by the teacher, and I would do these murals on the blackboard, and the kids are all fascinated by my drawing skill, which was, a bit advanced for my age. And, so I was encouraged greatly by my parents, and I had a lot of books that, as a child, my mother would read to me sometimes, and I would also read them, but I drew in every book that I ever had. The stories would fascinate me, and I would try to visualize the characters of the stories and other things. So, my skill, such as it was absolutely identified and encouraged by my family.
Excellent. And then you had the gumption or the fortitude to think, hey, I want to, reach out to an automotive company. And it sounds like GM's encouraged you to go to the Pratt Institute.
Not entirely in that sequence. Yes, through high school, I knew I was going to be an automobile designer. And I would subscribe to and right away correspond to the auto companies to get photographs of those dream cars. That was an era of tremendous activity by the auto companies, especially GM with their Motorama cars, of these very showy vehicles, dream cars, some called them, experimental cars, others called them. And all of those, plus the rich design of production cars, really made it clear in my mind that I would be an automobile designer. I had 4 years of liberal arts college upon graduation from high school, and then I went to Pratt Institute in Brooklyn, New York, which is one of the few really profound design colleges in America. Art Center School at the time, now Art Center College, was one. Pratt, Rhode Island School of Design. And GM didn't encourage me to go there. It was rather a case of which of these campuses will I attend. And I guess my parents felt that Pratt would be the better choice for me. And it was a degree-granting college, whereas Art Center was not a college. It was a school that gave you a certificate upon completion. But that's the sequence of how that took place. And then I was interviewed in my senior year at Pratt by, at that time, the 4 auto companies in the United States, and GM, Ford, Chrysler, and American Motors. They weren't American Motors at the time. I can't remember quite whom they were. But they interviewed us, and I was lucky enough to get an offer from all of them, and I picked General Motors.
Do you remember back why you picked General Motors at that time?
Well, unquestionably at the time, especially to a young fellow, GM cars were the most stylish, the most, later I use these words now, but I didn't know them at the time. They were the most coherent designs, they were the most thematic designs, and they certainly were the most eye-opening designs, even more so than maybe Studebaker. And it just appealed to me. Also, it was a huge corporation. They had, many divisions, 5 different auto brands, Chevy, Pontiac, Olds, Buick, and Cadillac, whereas Ford was essentially Ford, Mercury, and Lincoln. And Chrysler did have 4, Plymouth, Dodge, DeSoto, Chrysler, and I suppose a 5th, Imperial, was from time to time a brand, not a division of Chrysler. But nonetheless, it was GM that really, attracted my attention.
Yeah, you had to think back. You had to be on cloud 9 to think that you, at a young age, thought, I want to be in automotive, potentially an automotive designer, a kid who was drawing tanks and planes, and now you're being recruited or accepted by the big 3, if not the big 4 in automotive upon graduation.
Yeah, it was a wondrous thing. I recall very distinctly getting my letter of approval from all of them, and it just, was thrilling, and I made my mind up immediately. I think my mind had been made up that if I got an offer from GM, that's where I would go. So I was just delighted.
So you moved to Detroit. Where did they, how did the beginning of your career with General Motors start?
Well, not Detroit, not technically. General Motors design facility is at a place called the GM Tech Center, which is where all of their non-production activities took place. Engineering staff, manufacturing staff, styling staff is what it was called in those days. And it was an enormous campus, beautiful. Eero Saarinen was the designer, and it was one of those kind of dream worlds, huge. And that was outside of Detroit, about 35 or 40 miles, in a town called Warren, Michigan. And so that's, where I worked during the time I was at GM.
And that was really, now we come to know, somewhat of the heyday of that automotive time. You would think in the 50s and the 60s, General Motors, the design that they were doing, and you look back and I would think, you would just be a great time to be employed by GM. And let me know here if I'm wrong or right, but Harley Earl was there, also a kind of a famed designer.
Well, Harley was not there. He had retired a few years before. Bill Mitchell was the design director, and he was also a giant and a very personable and magnetic kind of individual. And it was a dream time. We didn't know it at that moment because we were in the midst of that era and didn't realize, what a wonderful time it was. But we were designing all of those wonderful 60s cars that GM was producing, plus show cars and special feature cars and so on. So we did realize that we were in a special era to a certain extent, but not as vividly as one would observe it today.
A lot of the information that I got from this, and really what kind of led me down the path of wanting to reach out to you, was an article that Classic Trucks magazine put out. A guy by the name of Jim Ost had interviewed you, and you had some input in the second gen C10, the 67 style. Can you kind of walk us through some of that?
I was assigned a truck studio. I began at GM, as all starting designers do, an orientation studio, was there for several months. And then my first studio assignment was one of the advanced rooms. The studios are huge, by the way. They're as big as, nearly as big as a tennis court. And because they have to have plenty of space for full-size models and a lot of viewing room, allowing you to walk around those models and sort of evaluate the design. And my first studio was one of the advanced studios, and we did some wonderful vehicles in there. Some of them were show cars, others for the, the 63 World's Fair or something like that. The big New York World's Fair. We, worked on some of those concept cars, the Firebird 4, and I think one was called the GMX. And then after that, I was assigned to Truck and Coach Studio, which is what it was called in those days. And that was a very, very vivid time in that studio. We had a remarkable studio chief, Don Lasky, and we just did such a wide variety of cars, trucks, the early Chevy vans, El Caminos, the full-size truck line that you referenced to, the big, when GMC was making the big line hauler tractors, we did those, cab overs, big forward control cabs, a concept gas turbine vehicle for GMC, the Turbo Titan, had the largest windshield ever made for a vehicle on it. Even did some work on a bus, the GM Scenic Cruiser, a couple of steps inside took you to a elevated level, and there was even a windshield on the roof for that other, that upper Vista region. And I did a graphic for that, a gas turbine powered version, which was experimental. And all in the, speaking of which, in Truck and Coach, we got a random kind of a rogue project, which was to take a Chevy van that was being prepared as a hydrogen-powered concept vehicle and to take a Corvair, the second generation, which is being prepared as an all-electric vehicle. And Don said, here, you do these. And so I did not much more than customizing them, but I had an opportunity even to work on a GM's first hydrogen-powered vehicle. I can't remember what it was called. It was a Chevy van. And then the Electrovair, which was maybe not their first electric vehicle, but I rather think it was. And, just kind of spruced it up a little bit and some special features here and there. And I think that's about it. But we did a vast array of vehicles that it was just a joy.
Yeah, it sounds like just a new adventure every week for you. To think that the Corvair, I mean, to think now with the popularity of electric cars in the future that we're going to see, with the Corvair being electric in, what is this, like 6345?
About that.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Wow. That had to be exciting.
It was wonderful. I just enjoyed it so much. And on the hydrogen-powered Chevy van, and I cannot remember the name of that vehicle, every now and then I'd have to go out and take a look at it as it was being built. And I had the pleasure of getting hazard pay because it was such a volatile, dangerous vehicle. They couldn't even do the fabrication and the engineering at GM Engineering. They had to go out to the proving grounds, and they poured a special cement slab, and they put up a big kind of a circus tent and did it out there so that if the thing ever did explode, it would not cause collateral damage, to the building and other employees. And when I went out there, it was a bit of a drive out to the proving grounds from the tech center. I was on hazard pay. And as you probably know, if you've researched me at all, you know that I have a disability. I had polio when I was 13 in 1949 before the Salk vaccine, and I had long leg braces and crutches. And the first time I went out to the tech center, I was getting out of my car, and one of the engineers saw me. He said, whoa, get back in that car. Okay. And he jumped in the passenger seat, said, here, you drive over to that point there, which is a couple hundred yards from this tent that I just described. And he said, look, we've got a problem here. He said, your braces could cause a spark, and that would ignite the whole operation. I'm not sure we can permit you to come out here. Who are you, and what are you doing? I said, I'm Harry Bradley, and I'm a designer at GM styling staff, and I'm the designer on this vehicle. He said, well, what do you expect to do here? I said, well, I expect to do my job, just to take a look at what's going on and make sure that the vehicle you're fabricating, the modifications, are consistent with the clay model that we did. And he said, well, it is. Thank you very much. Goodbye. And only he was very courteous about it, but that was the sum and substance. And I said, okay, whatever you wish. And he said, we just can't let you in there. And I said, my braces are aluminum, and they're, inside my slacks. And he said, yeah, but I can see down by your ankles that there are the ankle joints, the fittings. Those don't look aluminum. Those look like they're steel. And I said, I think they are. He said, well, bye-bye. So, that was kind of a little sidebar that was sort of fun. And I told my boss when I got back, Don, I said, Don, I don't know if these guys are fabricating the car we designed, but here's my story. And he listened, and he was not happy, but said, if that's the way they want it, that's the way it'll be. Don't worry about it.
Wow. That had to just be something where you were kind of like, really? But apparently they were pretty worried about it. And the hydrogen van, did it continue to move on and progress?
Hey guys, I have Andrew from Painless on. Andrew, our guys are thinking about rewiring their truck. Why should they choose Painless Performance?
Well, Ronnie, we've been doing it 30 years now. We're American made, American proud. We have unmatched tech support. You'll get one of our guys right here in Fort Worth, Texas, if you have a call. And, our installation manual is full color and covers everything you need to know.
There you go, guys. You get rid of that 40-plus-year-old wiring. You get easy-to-read printed wiring. Painlessperformance.com. They've got you covered if you want to go OG Classic or if you want to go something customized. Thanks, Andrew. Painlessperformance.com. Hey guys, are you thinking about swapping out your old motor for a more reliable LSLT-based power plant? We've got great news for you. PSI Conversion is offering our listeners 10% off your order. Behind each PSI harness, you get over 10 years of experience in the business, online tech support, phone support, and harnesses made in the U.S. That's psiconversion.com. And don't forget, use code C10 Talk and save 10% today. You've heard me talk about my gauges, Dakota Digital. I love them. Don't forget the interior of your build. Dakota Digital has the best gauges for our trucks. Whether you want a direct fit into the stock bezel or something custom. These kits are complete with sensors for any engine. The new RTX series is really incredible. I think it stands for retro, but it should stand for rad. They look just like the stock clusters, but have all the technology you'd expect from Dakota Digital. You can change the lighting colors, customize the reading in the message centers, and do it all from the mobile app. That's right, the HDX and RTX series have Bluetooth technology, so you can mess with them from your phone. Just don't do it while you're driving. I'm looking at RPM, trip odometer, percent fuel, oil pressure, and now I have the GPS set up. I can tell you direction, elevation, and even outside temp. Damn, son, it's like a modern truck, but even better in a classic. Dakota Digital is absolutely the best in aftermarket gauges, so check them out at dakotadigital.com. dakotadigital.com. And you can follow them on Instagram and Facebook too. The hydrogen van, did it continue to move on and progress?
Yeah, it was. They had a special press day at the Tech Center, which, as I described a moment ago, was a beautiful campus with big reflecting lake and all kinds of really remarkable buildings and sculptural shapes and so on. And they had the two vehicles there, the Electrovair and that Chevy van, whatever it was. And it was there, and it had these two huge round spheres inside to contain, I guess, the hydrogen and something else. And it seemed to be okay because the press was there from all over the country and indeed some from Europe. And they had this big outdoor banquet, and I was invited. And they could drive. There's room inside for two or three inside the van. And they could drive it around the lake and enjoy its performance and so forth. So they seem to have somehow overcome the issue of combustibility.
Okay. That was very forward thinking and obviously the futuristic for you guys at the time, I would assume. And
because hydrogen as a power source had not yet gained the public attention that it did later with some of the space activities that are, apparently have some hydrogen power to them. And now we're hearing a lot about hydrogen as a alternative to even to electric vehicles.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So kind of going back to the trucks and you in the truck division, the 67.
No. I was not in truck division. There is no truck division at General Motors. There's Chevrolet truck, which is part of Chevrolet division, and then there's GMC division. But I was an employee of GM styling staff, and they'd move you around from one studio to another. Some designers didn't move much, some moved a lot. But I was always an employee of styling, not of any division.
Okay.
But I know where you're saying and where you're going.
Well, just from the styling division of that second generation C10, the 67, that is such a popular to this day stylish truck, very popular car-like, the lines. Can you think back to being part of that team?
Well, it's part of the team, but I did not design that truck. That truck came from a fellow named Phil Jacobson, who was a wonderful designer, a very quiet fellow, and really a delightful guy, and Don Lasky. The two of them, I think, are pretty much authored that. I surely worked on it, and I did an awful lot of design illustrations and design renderings, and somebody told me years later that I apparently did the GMC front on the truck, which is basically just a grill. But you sort of lose track sometimes of what you do because, you know, it's kind of a blur. You're just working on this and this and this, and especially in that studio. But your analysis of that truck is spot on. It has an automotive quality to it, which is delightful. At the time, I was really disappointed in that quality because I felt that trucks should be truck-like. That's the way I was educated at Pratt, you know, that form follows function. And furthermore, the 40s Chevy and GMC trucks were so wonderful with those big, powerful, roundish fenders and the strong, assertive truck-like forms of the hood, the bold grille patterns. And then all of a sudden GM came out with the 55 Chevy truck line, which is extraordinarily automotive and a rather silly design for a truck. That's very stylish, and I know a lot of people like those trucks, but they were, you know, largely the 55 Chevy passenger car, and they produced those for a number of years. Then they got into the 60s truck line, which was kind of like a cheeseburger. It was one kind of layer over another, and that was typical of what was going on with, again, some of the automobiles, especially the 60 Oldsmobile and so forth, and 61 Pontiacs, etc. And so there was an automotive tradition that that GM styling staff just believed in, and they sold their viewpoint to Chevrolet. We always designed for Chevrolet, and GMC doesn't, you know, they did not get into the picture until the last minute. The GMC is largely a marketing division, not so much an engineering and production division. And so, you know, there was this really groundswell of automotive design appearing through and through GM's commercial vehicles. And then it was time to do the 67s, and Don Lasky believed completely in that automotive look. And it did have a profound kind of passenger car quality to it. It's not what I would call a strong design. I think it's a fabulous design. But it has almost a Toronado graphic pattern across the bottom of the body side, a horizontal line, a round wheel opening, horizontal line, round wheel opening, horizontal line. And, you know, that's very much what the Toronado is all about. And once again, Don was very faithful to his assigned task of kind of reintroducing an automotive look into the truck even more than the previous series. And he had a standalone hood which stood above the fender line, and then a long fender line, a beautiful line. And unlike any of the previous trucks, we initiated a body side on the style side, or fleet side, if you will, that tapered. It wasn't horizontal lines that could have been formed on a brake, but rather it was a sculptured line that tapered back and down gently. And the cabin was really a well-balanced and beautifully thematic design with what we call a cadet roof, meaning that the drip rail came up the back of the door, came forward and tied in across the windshield, much like the hat of a soldier, the formal cap of a soldier. That hence the word cadet roof. Another example of a cadet roof would be the 71 full-size GM cars. But Don's design was really masterful and very handsome, and and thoroughly automotive.
That hood, that grill, those lines, even today, it's a very popular. It's stood the test of time, and the lineage going back is, something that draws a lot of people to that truck and that body style. One thing that I read in the article was that GM, possibly whoever it was, wanted to use the older style 50, 55, like they did with the cheeseburger 60 to 66. My son has a step side GMC, a 1966 step side, and it's got the 55 fender flares for the step side. And that in the article with Jim, it said that they wanted to continue that. And you said, no, I'd like to design a new fender, or you and your team, or you and the team.
Well, that's true. At one point, Don came to me. The all-new 67 was well along. I mean, it was virtually a done deed. And he said that Chevy truck is still balking over the fact that this thing is based on completely new tooling underneath the floor pan, the grill, the frame, and a lot of the other inner panels. And they wonder why in the world we just can't take this 67 and put it on the 55 chassis. And he says, you better give me a rendering and I'll show him, how unattractive it would look. Then he came back to me maybe a day later and I'd finished the render, and he says, no, that's not what I had in mind. You made it look too good. They're going to say, yeah, see, we told you so. He said, I want you to do it again and make it look ugly. I said, well, I don't know how to take, our new proposal on paper, in a rendering form and make it look ugly, because the miserable distortion of performance, of proportions and theme would not be evident on paper. You have to have a really good eye to spot it. He said, you're right. He said, I'm not going to show him any vision, any view of our design put on the 55. That was a bad idea. I'm sorry I asked to do it. But I guess he just talked his way out through that and helped GM, Chevrolet truck especially, understand that it was time for them to get a new structure. And even then, it wasn't totally new. There were some carryovers.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Now, something else that's discussed and is, been researched and talked about is, when you think about a new platform, is the Blazer, and some of the comments that you were involved with, that first smaller, looks like a very Jeep-esque utilitarian Blazer. Do you recall being part of that as well?
Yeah, very much so. And I was a part of that. We took that thing just about to production. I recall being told that when it was canceled, that they even had the brochures all printed up, ready to go. But for some reason, Chevrolet truck pulled out of that. What we heard was they just didn't think there was a big enough market for Ford. They had their Bronco, and then International Harvester had the Scout, and we would come in with the Chevy Blazer, and GMC would pick up their version with whatever they were going to call it. And suddenly the word was, and I think it came down actually from corporate management, no, we're not going to do this. There's no market for it. And it was a proprietary vehicle, meaning it was virtually all original sheet metal, and it was kind of an exciting vehicle. It had some of the 67 body side, but very, very little. It was all, totally new. And then at the last minute, they decided to get back into the market. They felt that Ford had expanded the market with a Bronco, and they would come out with a Blazer, but they didn't have time to resurrect all the tooling that had been done on the new one. So that's when they took the pickup truck and kind of cobbled it up in a frenzy and came up with the Blazer that was actually the full-size Chevy pickup, but we did do a full clay on it, and we were all very excited about it. The building was excited about it. They said the word was that after the Tornado, this may be the most exciting all-new vehicle that has come out of GM in recent years.
When you look back over your career and you think about all the different vehicles that you were involved with and worked on, do you become, as a designer, do you go into it knowing that, hey, this might not happen? Not just your GM career, but your overall automotive design career?
That's an interesting question, because that was one of the biggest hurdles that I had to deal with. I never knew so many proposals got canceled. I guess as a fellow on the outside looking at the finished vehicles, whether they were production vehicles or show vehicles, I just believed that, well, they started to do that, they did it, and there it is. The fact is that the number of vehicles I worked on that got canceled was enormous. And it took me a little time to kind of digest that and live with that, because you become attached to these things, even though maybe 10 years later you kind of forget about them a little bit. They become a bit hazy in your memory. But at the time, you certainly are attracted to them. And it's very difficult to see some of these vehicles, that just thrown away. And there are times when you work on something you know isn't going to go anywhere. It's an impossible vehicle. And you kind of don't want to do it because you know that it's just going to be, put in the warehouse and stored, the clay model. And, I worked on one of those in one of the advanced studios was Bill Mitchell's personal show car, so to speak. And it was very, very unreasonable and exotic and far-fetched design, but it was sure a knockout. And we knew while it was being done that it wasn't going to go anywhere. And management just put the screws to it and said, no, we can't let you do that. And I also did illustrations of a special Corvette that they asked me to do in Corvette Studio. I was never a designer there, but I was brought in to do illustrations of this Aerovette for the New York Auto Show, because they knew they wouldn't have it finished in time to photograph for the program. So they asked me to do some renderings of it. And there were some changes made at the last minute to it, because the corporation said that's not in the best interest of the public to have a vehicle without any side windows. Well, it was a one-way side window treatment, painted body color on the outside, but on the inside you could see out. But nonetheless, it gave the impression that it was kind of a cocoon, except for the windshield. And, they had to just get rid of my renderings and modify them, actually, I think is what they did, to show the side windows, because the corporation wouldn't allow it. So the whole business of design work that you really invest your effort and your kind of heart and soul into, that doesn't go anywhere. It takes a little time to accommodate that and live with it.
I could see too, or I would think that when you start, you are so pumped and motivated because you do think, and whether the word is naive or not, it's just the cycle of the process in life. You're putting everything into it. And then after time goes on, that you draw and you put your heart and soul into something, and it doesn't make it the next time, it would be harder and harder, just a human nature. Does that make sense?
Yeah, your point is perfect.
When you're looking for classic Chevy or GMC truck parts, BrothersTrucks.com is your #1 source for 1947 to 87 Chevy and GMC truck restoration parts. So whether you are restoring an original or looking to customize that classic truck, BrothersTrucks.com has thousands of the highest quality truck parts for you to choose from. So head over to BrothersTrucks.com and order your free catalog today. And don't forget to follow Brothers on Facebook and Instagram for daily updates and special offers too. With a company history dating back to 1949, Airlift Performance brings a dedication and expertise to those looking for a life on air. Their 3H system combines pressure-based control with ride height sensing technology, harnessing both systems, including an intuitive handheld controller providing at-a-glance status of pressure and height conditions. Every 3H system comes standard with Bluetooth technology built right in, and a free companion mobile app allowing wireless control for most smartphones and mobile devices. Designed for a life on air. AirliftPerformance.com. C10 Nation, what's stopping you? Well, CPP has you covered. They offer multiple different options to make the disc brake conversion as easy as possible on both you and your wallet. And I am so stoked to announce they are giving our listeners 10% off your total order. 10%. Damn, son. From stock height conversions to their Big Brake Grand Slam kit. How's your altitude? You need to get a little lower? CPP has you covered there too. They offer a wide variety of drop kits for you to choose from. Guys, take advantage of this 10% savings now. Head over to ClassicPerform.com, that's ClassicPerform.com, and use special code C10 Talk. That's C10 Talk to save big today.
Yeah, your point is perfect. I don't know how to quite explain this, but a design studio, especially in the automotive design world, not so much product design, but automotive design, is a very emotional place. The mood, the spirit, the kind of enthusiasm level by nature is very high. And you are given a new project, you know, I can remember those every time we start a new project, whether it was in, you know, truck and coach studio or Cadillac studio. You know, the designers, there aren't too many designers in a studio. There's, unlike popular opinion, there's only maybe 4 or so. And, you know, you sit down with the studio chief and he gives you the assignment, and it's not that he gets you all pumped up with collegiate phrases, you know, yelling and hooting and all this and that. But the sophisticated wordage is every bit as infused with motivation as would take place in a locker room. But it's, you know, kind of elegant and well-mannered as opposed to, you know, being more, you know, vocal. And you put the spirit into your work. So your point is well made that it is difficult to sort of separate yourself away from a vehicle that you've, you know, that you've really done your best with and have hope for. And there it goes to the warehouse.
You had some different experiences moving through studios. Did you have a studio that you preferred at your time in GM?
No, I liked them all. I was fortunate enough to be in truck and coach, and several advanced studios. In one of the advanced studios, we did the all-new second-generation Chevy 2, which the next model year became the Nova. I think that was a 67. I was in several production rooms, Chevy, Pontiac, cars that don't even exist anymore. Talk about, you know, heartbreaking. It's hard to believe I designed and worked on, rather, cars that just don't exist anymore. Pontiac and Oldsmobile, I was in both those studios. My last one was Cadillac, and I liked them all, every one of them. I was in a chef. I was also in station wagon studio. Worked on the, what was it, 65 wagons, I think it was. I can't remember some of the others I was in.
When you think back, was there ever a car that you thought, now that you can tell us, I mean, obviously it's been a long time, that you thought this is a travesty that General Motors isn't going to create and produce this car, and we've worked on this, and it's an amazing vehicle, and you thought for sure it would go to production?
I don't quite follow your point. Do I recall working on anything that I didn't think would make it and it became a production vehicle?
Actually, the opposite. Something that you thought as a designer, maybe like the initial Blazer, that you thought for sure would be something that they would create and that they didn't, and you were shocked and or let down.
No, most of the projects I worked on were destined to get into production, except for that concept vehicle I mentioned for Mitchell. That didn't make it, and we were all glad. We thought, this thing is really a joke. It shouldn't be done. It was a V12, and it was front-wheel drive or rear drive or four-wheel drive, and it was just really, too exotic. And it had these separate pontoon fenders on all four wheels with no wheel openings and so forth. That one didn't go anywhere, and thank goodness for it. But most of the things I worked on, or saw in the studio, there was one. My first studio, I can't remember what the name of it was one of the advanced studios. And Mitchell he was crazy about the boat tail upper or roof on the 63 Corvette. And you all recall what that looks like. Comes to a point, it's got a split rear window. And the all-new big cars were being done, which meant the E-bodies, which were the Eldorado, Riviera, Toronado. And on the all-new Riviera, and I think it would have been maybe the 67, he wanted the back end to have a boat tail. And I did not work on it, but in that room, they did a boat tail Riviera, big car, and it was god-awful. Well, it did not get into, that came out in 66. It did not get into production, thank goodness. But lo and behold, around 68 or 9, they did put the boat tail on the back of the Riviera, and it is not one of GM's happier designs. So that is a shape that, though I didn't work on it, it did eventually go into production, and it was not an altogether wonderful design. I think it was very successful, but that's what happens in the consumer marketplace.
Another thing that's documented is during your time at GM, hey, you're not allowed to work somewhere else or design. It sounds like you did under an alias of Mark Fodner, and you did some different work for the Alexander brothers. And one vehicle that is just absolutely stunning, it's tied to you. I've looked up some different things. It's such a cool vehicle, is the Dodge D100. Can you take us back and talk a little bit about that?
At the time, I was a smart ass. I hope you can use that word.
You can use it, yeah.
And I didn't have as much respect for a company that treated me beautifully as I should have. GM was wonderful to me, and I'm not saying this now to patronize them, but they gave me every chance that anybody would have had, despite my disability. And I moved around. I wasn't really hobbling or struggling. My mobility was marvelous. I traveled all over the world and, did anything I wanted to do, but nonetheless, I was disabled. And I got special parking space in the executive garage, and, it was just marvelous. And yet I was really disrespectful and just dumb to have done what I did. I did design some cars for the Alexander brothers. Some of your listeners may not know who they are. They're one of the 2 or 3 leading custom car shops in America, and they turned out some really very, very wonderful custom cars and street rods. And I did the Diora, which had quite a famous track record. We'll get into that in a moment, I guess. And, and I did a few other vehicles for them, and I'm sorry that I spoke about it openly in that interview and maybe in some other venues, but I did it, and I've since realized Well, sure, GM knew what the heck was going on. They're too smart not to know, and I guess they just put up with it. But it's not a strange protocol at all. Why would you want your creative people, whether they're attorneys or designers working for your competition? You wouldn't want that, and you would not allow it. So it was a reasonable mandate on their part that I chose to ignore.
I think this is super layman too. I just feel like, I don't know, hard to put it into words and put it into perspective, but you were extremely talented. You're a young man. You're a wild stallion. I don't, forgive the analogy. And I could see where you had this, you have so much talent that you wanted to create. So I understand that at this point in your life, you look back on that and maybe regret it, but it's your story, and I don't think it's looked at negatively from today's world now. So,
well, Ronnie, that's very kind of you, but I must just wrap up this segment of our interview and say you're dead wrong. First of all, you say, I had talent as a young stallion. Everybody at GM was gifted. I don't think there was one designer there that didn't have my talent and more, a great deal more. And so everybody had an opportunity to do work on the outside, and precious few did. There were one or two that did yacht design and, big luxury cruiser designs, but nobody did automobiles the way I did, and you just didn't do that kind of thing.
Okay. So you leave GM, you go to Mattel, and that was the influence that you had. And I would think, as we discussed, you have so much creativity. I think the cool part now is everything you do design and put your heart and soul into, for the most part, it's going to get made into a Hot Wheels. Can you take us back to that time?
That's a bizarre story, and I'll be brief because it could go on and on and on. Mattel ran an ad in the Detroit newspaper. They're looking for automobile designers. All this talent that you and I referred to a moment ago wants to work in California. Most of the designers at GM went to Art Center School in Los Angeles, and whether they came from North Dakota or Louisiana, they got a taste of, for 3.5 years of Southern California at its best back in the 50s and 60s and so forth. And everybody wanted to go to California and do what? Well, there's nothing to do in California if you're a designer. There's no product design, no automotive design. Then all of a sudden this company, and most of us didn't know a lot about Mattel, because while it was the number one toy company in America and a giant in industry, we were pretty focused on cars. That's that kind of raw quality I mentioned a moment ago, that by God, you don't even think about product design. You don't think about it, other design. You're a car designer, and you're a General Motors car designer. So, Mattel was not very well known, maybe among the fellows who were starting families and had children and were buying, Mattel toys. I barely knew them, but we all interviewed. Not all of us, but several interviewed. I got the job offer. My renderings are always very fanciful. This is important detail or sidebar. I always put like street rods in my renderings of new Cadillacs or new Chevrolets, and maybe and girls, in bathing suits, and kind of beach scenes and palm trees in the background, and in Cadillac Studio I used to draw these castles and have sort of Elizabethan trivia in the background. And it's exactly that quality, I realized later, that got me my job offer from Mattel, because they're a toy company. And a toy company is fanciful and joyful, and there is a quality that Mattel really focuses upon which is why they were so successful. It's called play value. These are toys you've got to play with, and they kind of enrich you. They give you feedback, not like a hula hoop or a frisbee where you just work it, but it doesn't ask any more of you than what the immediate application is. Mattel toys were really brilliant toys, and they saw this playful quality in my artwork, and they thought it was wonderful. Okay, so much for that. I started at Mattel. I kept saying, well, what am I going to be doing? Well, we don't know. Am I sure I want to go there? That's up to you. We're offering you a lot of money, chance to come to California. And again, because I was young and stupid, I said, sure, let's do it. And I walked away from the best job a car design guy could possibly ever have. But like a lot of fellows, I complained a little bit about the weather in Michigan and, and so forth. Well, actually, Michigan's a wonderful state, beautiful state. A lot of things to do all year round, even if you're disabled as I am. So I go to Mattel in Hawthorne, California, suburb of Los Angeles by the beach. And boy, it was really like a fish out of water. Nobody's drawing cars. And they all look at me and they're wonderful to me. They treated me, another company treated me beautifully, but what are you doing here? I don't know what I'm doing here. Okay. So the guy that hired me said, okay, Mr. Handler, the chairman of the board and the co-founder of Mattel, Elliot Handler, he and Ruth, his wife, were at their daughter Barbara's house one day, and yes, it's Barbara, Barbie doll. And it was a weekend, and his grandchildren are playing with Matchbox cars. And it stuck in his craw. He kept saying to himself, I'm the largest toy manufacturer in the world, and my grandkids are playing with something I don't even make. He announced to his board of directors and his senior executive advisors, head of engineering, head of marketing, and so forth, I want to get into that little toy, they weren't even called toy cars, little miniature car business. They all said, Elliot, you can't do that. They don't do anything. They sit there. It's the kind of stuff that a kid buys, and he doesn't even buy it. His mother buys it for him to give to his father. There are things like tanks and strange European vehicles. The colors are all drab. The wheels don't roll. You can't get into this. It's just a trinket. What do they call it? A stocking stuffer. Okay. But he said, I'm the president. I'm going to do it. Run an ad for the best car designer you can find. And they chose me. I wasn't the best car designer, but I was a vivid car designer. I go there, and I was driving a very fancy car at the time. It was an El Camino 64, and it was customized. The roof is what we call chopped, meaning it was lowered. Had a Pontiac Grand Prix rear window that swept out onto the pickup box. Big, huge tires and wheels of the day, big red striped tires and wide oval red striped tires and mag wheels and imitation injectors poking through the hood, and it was painted school bus yellow, known as National School Bus Chrome, with a black vinyl roof that swept down and became the tonneau cover. It was very graphic, very bold, very clean, and pretty wonderful, if I do say so. Okay, because of my disability, they let me park in the executive parking lot, which is right in front of the main R&D building. And let me see how I can brief this out a little bit. Okay, my boss said, go out and buy an example of every miniature car you can find. So for the first week or so, I was driving around Southern California in my El Camino, going to toy stores and buying every possible model of Matchbox and Dinky and other small cars. I had them. I hadn't drawn a line yet. What do I do with these now? My boss said, well, let's mount them on a board. So they had these movable boards, and we attached them with little fine wire devices. And there they all were. Now what do I do? Well, we want to see if there's a clue here for us. There was no clue there. Everybody hated them. What am I going to do? Well, why don't you start drawing cars? Well, what kind of cars? Well, maybe some antiques, maybe some 40s cars, maybe some custom cars. No, they didn't say that. Maybe some new cars. You know what the future is going to be like for automobiles, some futuristic cars. So I did these renderings, and people looked at me like I was strange because they all use markers. The quick sketch magic of getting an idea out quickly on a piece of paper of a child playing with a this, with a that, with a some kind of new idea. And here I am doing these renderings. And Elliot came by one day and stood and watched me as I rendered. He said, "Is this the way you people work in Detroit?" And I said, "What do you mean the way?" Well, he said, "It's so labor intensive and takes so much time to do these renderings, and you fuss over every tone and every subtle nuance." And I said, "Yeah, that's what we do." He said, "It's insane. It's a miracle they make any money back there." He said, "I want you to stop doing that." Okay, how do I communicate? I use markers like all the other designers here do. So I had to learn a new technique, which I had begun to experiment with at GM, and they didn't like it. Okay. And then he came by another day. He said, "What's that thing you're driving out there?" "That thing? What are you speaking of, Mr. Handler?" "That yellow and black, what do you call it?" "Oh, it's an El Camino, a customized El Camino." "That's going to be our car. That's what we're going to do." "And what do you mean by that, sir?" "What I mean is every one of these cars that we're going to produce will have 5-spoke wheels. I counted them. Going to have big tires of red stripes. And the wheels will have little, what are those things called, those little chrome things, lug nuts?" "Yeah, going to have those. Every one of them is going to look like a Detroit car. The Camino still had the body of an El Camino with some of these special features like the chopped roof and so on. They're all going to look like Detroit cars, but modified. So you'll be able to see a Cadillac Eldorado in the design or a Ford Thunderbird in the design. They're going to be very bright colors. And that's what we're going to do." And I think there was something like 4 or 5 features. And he reminded me so much of Bill Mitchell and some of the other design executives at GM. Boy, when they knew what they wanted it. They verbalized it perfectly. They motivated you. They were extraordinary. I did have the privilege of working for some of the most inspired talent, I think, in the design world. And Elliot was clearly one of them. He's a brilliant man. Okay, so I started doing kind of customized new cars. And then people became sort of interested in what I was doing. But still, his immediate circle of advisors said, "This is stupid. Don't do it. We cannot copyright them because it's basically a Chevrolet or a Ford or a Plymouth with some little adjustments. We can't use other people's products. We never have. We never will. You can't do it." There's no play value. The rolling wheels hadn't been designed yet. The suspension had not yet been designed. So they were still seen as static. These are just stocking stuffers. The marketing people said, "There's no room on shelves in toy stores of America for any more new products by Mattel. We're going to have to remove something to make room for this thing." It didn't have a name yet. So they were still doomed as a line of products. And then one day, Jack Ryan, who was director of R&D and a brilliant man himself, said, "Let's call these things Hot Wheels," and which I thought was a terrible name. It's like taking the word hot rod and leaving part of it out. It would be like hot rod, I can't think of another example all of a sudden, but it didn't quite make sense. Well, it's gone on to become a nomenclature of Americana, really, of American toy design. And then this young woman, just fresh out of engineering school at Cal State Long Beach, she developed a suspension. And this is an interesting final point that I'll make. Mattel toys were always known for being technologically advanced, and Mattel was known for hiring some of the finest practitioners of technical design available. For instance, the talking toys, they had these audio engineers from Hollywood that developed the audio aspect. And when the farmer says moo, the farmer doesn't say moo. When the farmer points to the cow and the cow says moo, it was really a moo. And it was really the sound of a sheep baying. It was really the roar of a lion. And the audio quality on Mattel toys was just spectacular. Take a look at Barbie sometime, at the face. However did they get that beautiful, subtle, but vivid makeup quality, the tonality of her cheeks, her eyes? Well, they hired makeup artists from Hollywood, and they brought in some of the finest technicians in eye makeup. And then they brought in special paint technicians to do the blending and the tonality. If you can look at Barbie from a kind of a product design quality, she's amazing. Well, I was blessed to have the same thing. The engineer that did the suspension made them so when you put your hands on those Hot Wheels, they'd press down. All the difference in the world. Play value is beginning to emerge. And then wheels that rolled. They were little like bearings almost inside. Now these things, you push them and they just keep going. That brought the track into play. They developed this wonderful orange flexible track. And suddenly the whole idea of these little vehicles that were just sitting on a shelf somewhere, in Dad's office or on the mantelpiece somewhere in the living room, suddenly they were toys. And kids and fathers and mothers were down on their hands and knees playing with them. And all of the naysayers, oh, gee, this is wonderful, but they still are not going to sell. So when I completed the original line, I think of 16 vehicles, they said, okay, these things are going to sell, but not very much, not in the quantities that Mattel is used to experiencing. So you have your choice of preschool or boys' toys or one of the other divisions. And I said, I'm sorry, I'm not a toy designer. And anyhow, I really wanted to start my own studio and be an automotive illustrator and designer. The Japanese have come to town with these funny little cars, and they're gonna do well. And I would like to make myself available to these Japanese companies and help them with their design work as they attempt to Americanize their vehicles a little bit. So I'm gonna say thank you, but no thank you and goodbye. So I left and I did start my own studio, and about 6 months later the phone rang and said, come back. Hot Wheels has become the largest selling toy in the history of the world toy industry. We were wrong. We can't make them fast enough. We need more Hot Wheels. Gee, I'm sorry I can't do that. I'm really making headway with my studio. I enjoy it. And it's the kind of thing I'd like to continue with. And I'm able to do a few specialty vehicles for the Japanese and even a few for some of the American companies. But I'll get you a designer. And I called a friend of mine that I knew at GM, Ira Guilford, and he said, sure, I want to come to California. It was that old kind of draw appeal that so many Detroit fellows felt. And he came into the second series. So that's the sort of magical story that all goes back to my El Camino and goes back to my disability. If I had not been disabled, I would not have been given preferential treatment in parking right along the front row of vehicles that you have to pass when you walk from the executive office of Mattel several yards to the research and development tower, and you have to pass that so-called thing of mine every day, 2 or 3 times a day. And that's because of my disability and Mattel's, courtesy, because in California, it never rains. So I really could have parked out there in the lot with everybody else, but they were kind enough. And all of that was magical and unforeseen and came together. And Elliot, once again, was the genius of the moment. End of story.
Well, thank you. That was, you brought plenty of smiles to my face and my audience as well, and young boys and even girls. It's just amazing to think. First of all, you brought up the orange track. I can't even tell you how many hours as a young kid I spent with that orange track, the loop-de-loop. And then to think that your wheel tire red line combination that you created or put together as a young man in Michigan, drive to California, and then that ends up being, as soon as you started talking about it, I mean, I can see it on the Hot Wheels car as kids growing up playing, on the ground and running them into one another. And I had the ability to have an interview where a guy told me just last week that he had over 10,000 Hot Wheels. And, just to think that became so popular. Did you ever think during that time, I've got to think that you were like, I was a GM designer and I'm in California. What the hell am I doing here? I don't even know what I'm doing here.
All the time. It doesn't take long for me to awaken and realize, that here I am with a disability. Mattel was very, very good to me. I want to make that point. But nonetheless, I had it all at GM. And, I reminded myself over and over and over again, my parents, who were extraordinary people, never criticized or complained or observed in a negative way what I had done, but I know in their heart of hearts they wondered, what's the matter with this guy? He was with the biggest company in the world, which GM was at that time. He was having great success. He was appreciated for his work. What's the matter with him? But sometimes some people do these foolish things. They play out, and and God forbid they don't on other occasions. But it all worked out okay for me.
Yes, very fanciful. I like that word.
And if my son did it, I'd probably wrap one of my crutches around his neck.
I could just see, your mom's at coffee. Mrs. Bradley, how's Harry doing at GM? Well, pour me another cup of coffee, Margaret.
No.
So you leave Mattel, you start your own studio. It sounds like that worked out. One of the cars that, at what time did you design the 69 Grand Prix for Dave Crook? Because that is a beautiful, beautiful car.
I don't remember the exact year, but I'm going to say somewhere around 70 or 71, because it was still pretty much a new car.
Were you able to, at that point of leaving and going out on your own, I assume that at that point, people in the California area or all over the country were looking to have you design stuff, or was that hard, or how did that kind of work out going out on your own?
Well, when I was at Pratt Institute, I did a number of articles for the so-called East Coast Custom and Rod magazines, and I became kind of a feature. Had a monthly article with 2 or 3 of them, and one of the major enthusiast magazines in California, Rod and Custom, saw the work, and they called me and said, we'd like you to do a sketchpad article for us of a car, customized. And so I began to develop a real kind of a pastime, if you will. And this is all legal. This is all in the up and up. I mean, Pratt didn't care whether I did magazine work on the side or not. And so I was developing a presence in the magazine world, both enthusiast and general readership. So that really parlayed into an ongoing activity. And there were months when I'd be in 3 or 4 magazines at a time. I often did covers for Motortron. I did Road and Track and other magazines. I even was featured occasionally in European magazines and Japanese magazines. Then there was design work that I was doing for some of the Japanese auto companies. I did some work for, in those days, Datsun, now known as Nissan, Toyota, and Mazda. The president of Mazda of America said I was responsible for saving Mazda because at one point they were just about to go under. They were not doing well in America. And he said, I want you to give me a rendering or renderings of a line of Mazda's luxury cars, still small, but luxury cars, compact cars, sports cars, and pickup trucks, little mini pickup trucks. I did a series of renderings, kind of a bit on the futuristic side, but production oriented. And according to him, that suite of renderings kind of encouraged Mazda to stay in the United States and keep going and try to maybe get some of these vehicles, some of my designs in production. And supposedly one of them was the first Mazda sports car with the rotary engine. Not my design entirely, but apparently my illustration was the core for what turned out to be the Mazda rotary. And I did some work for Volvo. So I was developing activity in the production and production car world. I was doing custom cars and street rods for some of the big shops in the country. So I was busy and doing well. Then I began to teach design and at Cal State Long Beach and Art Center School, and eventually I became a regular instructor at Art Center College of Design when they moved to Pasadena from downtown LA and became a college, a degree granting college. And I taught advanced automotive design there for 35 years, including their Swiss campus.
As an instructor, as a teacher, I feel like that's a very rewarding career. Do you look back at that and as a great time?
Oh yeah, it was wonderful. I enjoyed teaching. Many of the students that went through Art Center College went on to, have blazing careers in Detroit. I just thoroughly liked it, and it was good for me. I found myself really carefully thinking about design so that I could verbalize my thoughts intelligibly to the students, and so it was a two-way track, so to speak.
When you look back at your renderings, your job that you would submit to Rod and Custom and some of the futuristic stuff, I read that you were, they liked that, hey, what's coming next? What is the manufacturers, what do we think or anticipate? Do you think you were ahead of your time?
No, not at all. I think all designers, today is yesterday. And when you finish the design of a car or a truck, it's going to be at least a year or two, more than likely 3 or 4 before it hits the road or, the show circuit, whatever. So you really are always thinking about tomorrow. So I don't know that I was any more advanced than anyone else. probably not as advanced as some fellows. I remember some fondly who were just so far out there, you wondered how they could find their way to work in the morning. You know.
Do you have anybody that you looked up to from a design perspective at certain times in your career?
Oh yeah. There were designers at General Motors that, and I don't want to mention names because I'll forget one or two, but and you wouldn't know them. Your audience wouldn't know them. But there were fellows at GM that taught me a great deal, and who inspired me, and leaders, design directors, and studio chiefs that were really everything to me. So it definitely was a symbiotic, nurturing experience for me.
I believe you had more than one El Camino. You had your 64 that we talked about earlier. You designed another one. I think it was called Blind Faith, I think. I'm looking at my notes here.
That's not entirely correct. I bought a used 64 Camino in 1964 or 5 from a Chevrolet dealer. And that was all white. And it was kind of all dolled up. It had belonged to Chevrolet Promotion, and it had white wall tires and all kinds of, accessories all over it, and had bed rails and spotlights and all sorts of stuff, and the big engine. And that's the one I customized. The Alexander Brothers are the shop that did it, and that became the Hot Wheels. That was its second iteration. So it went from white, kind of a country club vehicle, to yellow and black, and I drove it that way for several years. Then I redid it again. It was on the cover of Rod and Custom, and a very famous shop, Bill Cushenberry, did some major modifications, the wheel openings, the tail lights, and so forth. Kept the roof, obviously, and the Pontiac Grand Prix rear window. And I painted that, or I had it painted. It kept the two-tone treatment. It was a kind of an olive green, and it was real showy, even more so than the yellow and black version, because it was more designerly. It had more features on it. And I drove that for probably, 10 or 12 years. And it was in shows now and then and featured in magazines. And then I decided, like a fool, that I would put a Toronado V8 in the back. And that became the one today known as Blind Faith. And the big 283 engine was pulled from the front, and the Toronado subframe was installed in the rear with the Toronado V8. And a lot of other things were done to it. A great many things are done to it. And that's the one that's white and black. It's white on the driver's half and black on the passenger half. And if you haven't seen it, it sounds insane. Well, please rest assured and be comfortable with that thought, because it was insane. It is insane. Currently, and for the last 20 years, it's been in the collection of the Peterson Automotive Museum in Los Angeles as one of their featured vehicles. And they mistakenly identify it as the Hot Wheels car. Well, it really is not. It just is too far removed. But it's a very, very exotic and I think kind of impressive in its own way, the vehicle.
What's your favorite car that you've ever owned?
I never had a favorite. I had a very nice 51 Chevy that Mom and Dad gave me at high school graduation, and I promptly tore that all apart, and it became a pretty well-known, very exotic custom car, the La Jolla, and a chopped roof and a real Corvette engine, and all kinds of special body work. I liked that. I liked the El Camino in all three versions, except for the white one. It was, it was just too weird as a sort of a country club El Camino, but I like the black and yellow version, the green and black version, and the black and white.
When I was younger, my son, the reason obviously the El Camino, but my son, he just was so drawn to El Caminos. Dad, it's a car and a truck. It's so cool. And the El Camino probably doesn't get the love that it deserves, often nicknamed the mullet of cars, but it's cool when you look at it that way, the perspective. I don't know where it fits in the world of automotive.
Well, they had their place. Ford was the first to introduce a sedan pickup. That's what they were called in those days. On the Falcon, the little Falcon body, and then GM jumped in and put El Caminos on the big full-size B body, which is the big Impala body. The 59 was the first year of that. It was pretty wild. And then Ford continued. Ford's always been really inspired in truck design, perhaps a bit more so than GM in those years. And then GM stopped making Caminos and then decided to get back into the market, and Chevrolet was tapped to continue the tradition. But then they went to the mid-size car, the A body, the Chevelle body. And then in Truck Studio, when we were asked to do the 68, we did something quite unique. We used the coupe door, which sort of ramped down at an angle, and it was a longer door because it was a coupe rather than the sedan. And now suddenly here is what we call a coupe pickup, and all El Caminos from then on were on the coupe body. So it had its place. They were sold primarily in the Southwest, Southern California, and so forth, Arizona, Texas. Nobody back east bought sedan pickups to speak of. They were very rare.
Is there a car that you look back that you always wanted that you never were able to receive or get?
Oh, yeah. I mean, good Lord. Most any Ferrari. But you don't long for stuff you didn't get or you couldn't get because you're always thinking ahead. So I have fondness for a lot of Alphas, kind of like European cars, a great deal, Italian cars especially, but also certain American cars. I feel very strongly about a 49 Ford two-door sedan. It's one of the great designs of all time, and it's a real good piece of product design. It's quite remarkable.
As your career went on and as cars got into the 80s and 90s, did they lose their sex appeal when you bring up like the 49 Ford? To me, the 36 Ford is probably one of the just absolutely stunning, sexy vehicle. The 59, even the 59 El Camino, those fins, and again, that's sex appeal. Did automotive get away from that?
Well, if you're interested in design and you don't put too much emotion into your preference or into your thinking, you accept change as it evolves. And today's cars are really out there, in my opinion, meaning there are things going on in today's cars that we never would have done decades ago, but we never could have done them because we didn't have the production technology or the manufacturing skills to do what's being done today. So I'm very comfortable with today's cars. Not all of them. Some of them are really, and I won't say which ones, are really unpleasant to me, but many of them are just extraordinary and breathtaking. And I kind of wish I could design cars today, be a designer, but that's all based on computer skills that I don't have. But I recall hearing decades ago, maybe back in the 70s or 80s, people kind of in my age group were some of the early designers of, well, you mentioned 36 Ford and 32 Fords and so on. And they were really distressed at the way fenders continue to flow through the body. So like a 49 Ford. So you didn't have individual fender wheel statements. And they regretted that because there was great beauty in that language of singularity and proportion and working out the struggle between a hood form and a grille form, coming forward between fender shapes and, having headlights sort of imposed upon that cavity between the fenders and the hood. And they were sad about that, and I can appreciate that because I kind of miss some of the things we used to do. I think of a lot of the 60s, late 60s, at least the GM cars are pretty wonderful, and I admire them today. Nobody's doing cars today that are sort of known. I mean, everybody understands a GTO or something of that sort, but we don't, the presence of engines and big tires means nothing today, and it should not mean anything.
One thing I look at as a kid of the 80s is how they keep reproducing movies, and you're like, well, can you guys come up with something they did it in the 80s? Can you come up with a new movie? Can you not come up with a new theme? The cars, it seems like even the cars and the sex appeal and the passion, they're remaking that, and they're kind of continuing off of a Camaro, off of a Challenger, a Charger, a Mustang. And you wonder at what point, obviously they have to sell. Now we have the Bronco coming back. They have to sell. They need to make money. But I don't know of a car that maybe the Corvette is something new and out of the box, where back in the day we would see the body lines and we would see new things and the excitement. And is there a car that you can think of that in the last 20 years is something new that wasn't just a concept?
Well, you're taking me into areas that I'm a little bit uncomfortable discussing because I don't have good recall. I'm sure in the last 20 years there are cars that I think are wonderfully innovative and fresh. You mentioned like the copies of Camaros and Mustangs and so on. Those are very few cars. I mean, not many people buy them, and they're not, in my opinion, as satisfactory as the originals. Well, how could they be? There's different issues that are imposed by safety and fuel economy and aerodynamics and construction. But I just feel good that things are moving ahead, and unlike what I think I'm understanding from your point of view, we're going to be moving ahead a great deal more, and we will have electric cars, and we will have hydrogen cars, and we will have autonomous vehicles that are self-driving, and they won't even look like cars. They'll look like refrigerators, perhaps. And I know that a lot of car people fear that and even hate it. I don't. That's the product design mentality in me that this is how we have to move forward.
Yeah, I think the electric cars, and like you said, the young Harry, I would assume, probably wouldn't think that way. This, like all of us, as we go into it. But whether it's naiveness, but we love that about people. But then as time goes on, you figure out, hey, we have to sell cars, we have to make money, we have to move forward. And the electric cars, and I'm amazed at what Tesla's doing in a time of the bigger automotive companies and the automation of a car and how it can self-drive. The future is here, and the future is now.
Yep, that's it. I mean, if you're the president of Mercedes, Daimler, or General Motors, your responsibility is to make profit, and you can't do it by recreating yesterday. There's just not enough yesterday people. And my wife is a real car person, and we have a new Mercedes. It's a couple years old, and it does things that she used to do. I mean, it looks toward the rear when she's backing up. It anticipates traffic on the left or the right. It anticipates stopping. It's almost smarter than we are. And at first, it took her a bit of adjustment because she's grown up. She has grown up with a clutch on the floor, and a stick shift, or she was driving her daddy's farm tractor all over the farm and sometimes through the farm. And she grew up, understanding mechanism and was around Porsches all of her young womanly life, and had an Austin Healey and so forth. And it took her a bit of doing to adjust to this Mercedes, and she loves it. And she's adapted to it, and she expects it now to do these things. And, it doesn't have gauges as such. You have to push a little prompt to get a gauge. It doesn't have a radio. It doesn't have a clock. That car does not have a spare tire or a bumper jack. And we had to evacuate 2 years ago, living here in Northern California where we moved. And let me tell you something. I'm in the back seat, with my disability was and my age, sort of the most comfortable place for me. And here we are traveling through the black of night in a winding road with no street lamps on an evacuation route. And all I could think of is, we've got no spare tire.
That's the designer. Where is the spare tire?
And that's me fearing contemporary technology. Instead of saying, I've got faith in those tires, the four of them, they won't go flat. Yeah, sure, pal. Where's the spare?
Yeah.
So there's adjustment on all levels. My son, and both our sons, they don't think about spare tires. And I do.
Well, we're glad you made it out. I'm going to take you out here. I appreciate your time. You've been gracious. One of the things that I really like to ask the older generation, or really any generation, is you've been there, you've done it, you've got the T-shirt. What advice do you give, not necessarily just from an automotive design, but you've seen a lot. What advice do you give the younger generations, just, whether that's automotive, whether that's just life in general, to learn?
You're an older guy and you've watched too many movies. I have no advice for younger generations except to do well, and be honest. And I'm just not in that business. I raised some kids, and that was a task. Thank you very much. And they've all turned out wonderfully. And I don't intend to give advice to anybody else. I thank you for your question, and it's a good question, but I'm afraid Harry Bradley has no answer to that one.
This is a quote, and I'm going to take you out with this. Harry Bentley Bradley is an icon of the custom car world forever.
Well, I don't know what that means, and I rather shed and disavow that. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not, but I am just the guy I am, and I thank you for your courtesy, and just don't forget, I'm just a guy. That's all.
Well,
I've been very lucky.
We thank you, Harry, for your time, for your contribution to the automotive world. I've enjoyed not only just talking to you, but really just the research and just reading all the different things. It's an enjoyable task to sit and just look through all of the images and think.
Thank you. That's very kind of you.
And just to think, what was Harry thinking here? It was cool to research you, to dive in deeper and find out more about you as a person, as a artist, as a teacher, as somebody who people look to. And we appreciate your contribution to American automotive and the car culture that we all love so much.
Well, Ronnie, you're very, very kind, and you're way over the top. My head is turned by your words and your thoughts, and just remember, I'm just a fellow like you or anyone else, and it's been a joy to talk with you, and your questions are extraordinary. They're really well thought out.
Thank you, Harry. Master
automotive designer, Mr. Harry Bentley Bradley, the one, the only. We appreciate your time. Thank you, sir. How awesome is that history, right? Thank you, Harry, so much for your time. For you guys tuning in, if you enjoy the pod, do me a favor. Please take the time, share it, rate it, and leave us a review wherever you listen to C10 Talk. Go there while you're listening right now. Please leave us a rate and review. We do appreciate it. Stay safe out there. Have a great Labor Day.